Ryan, what's up, man?
Hey,
How you
good
doing?
morning. Good. Thanks for having me
Um,
on.
Thanks for coming, man. I've been watching keeping track of your profile for a little while, and I keep seeing images of oil field Bitcoin mining, um, guns, babies, open spaces, nature, farming, meat, and I thought that's probably someone you want to talk to. So I'm looking
Yeah,
forward
you
to having a
bet.
chat today.
Yeah, up here in
Um,
Wyoming, it's a great place to be. Oh,
it
that's for
looks
sure. I'm trying to be an
incredible.
advocate of the state for sure.
Yeah. For people that may not be familiar with you, can we get the intro and then we'll get rolling?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm one of the co-founders and chief operating officers of J Energy. We're a Bitcoin mining company. Primary focus is on natural gas Bitcoin mining, but we're also breaking out into some on-grid spaces as well.
And what's the backstory of J Energy? How'd you get into that? It's a relatively new industry.
Yeah, you bet. So the real background is I'm an oil and gas guy by trade. I'm a petroleum engineer. I've been in oil and gas operations my entire career, so drilling, completions, production facilities. I've actually grew up pumping wells, so actually being an operator, running my own well sites, things like that. I grew up in Canada, right on the Alberta Saskatchewan border. I moved to the United States in 2008, so I've been here a while. I'm a permanent resident now. I've got the ability to apply for my citizenship. So um, there's a little
I
bit of
guess you're
work to
happy
do to get
about
through
that
that.
in recent with recent events.
Yeah, it's I don't want to get too much into the Canadian side of it. All I can say is that growing up in Canada, and even when my first quite a few years in the United States, I'd consider myself extremely proud Canadian, wear that maple leaf on my sleeve, make sure that everybody knew that I was Canadian. And I think now that after, everything that COVID and the way the oil and gas industry has been treated over the years up there too, it's just, it's tough. It's definitely
Yeah.
tough. Yeah.
It's it's crazy how much that country is shooting themselves in the foot right now. I mean, with all this stuff, you could connect the dots way back further than just the last 18 months, right? But
Yeah.
it's almost stunning that it seems like every move, the current government, but I doubt the other one, if the other ones were in power, it would be that much different. Conservatives usually is a little more friendly to oil and gas, but they just seem to be going in the exact opposite direction for a prosperous, healthy society and economy.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
ridiculous.
they sit on a wealth of natural resources, and that should be completely celebrated and pushed. But really, it's almost like it's trying to be, squashed and killed, which is it's too bad. And I mean, you said it right too, where you've got, there have been conservative governments in power very recently, within the last decade, and there's still no new pipelines that were built to the West Coast, no new pipelines that were built to the East Coast, and no new pipelines that were built down south to send more oil into the United States. So
Yeah.
when you're sitting on a wealth of resources, you can only consume so much yourself.
Yeah, but who needs resources when you have a money printer? It
Yeah,
kind of fixes
exactly.
everything.
But yeah,
So
so a little bit more background then. So, I moved down to the United States in 2008. Like I said, worked oil and gas operations my whole career. I actually, when I first moved to Texas, would have been in 2010. Uh, I moved down to right on the basically the Mexico Texas border. So I was living in Uvalde, working out of Carrizo Springs, which is about 40 miles or so from the border. We were drilling Eagleford, exploration wells at the time, which the Eagleford play ended up taking off. And I was running around that country. It was a lot of fun. I was one of the first engineers down in that field that worked for Anadarko Petroleum, who I was working for at the time. And I had a work visa to be down there, but you never crossed into the Mexico side. But it was pretty funny because you're actually going through checkpoints all the time, though, being that close to the border. And the first question that the border patrol guys ask you is, are you an American citizen? And no, I'm not, but I also can't speak Spanish. And so you're pulling all your paperwork. You've got to travel with your paperwork, and so it was pretty wild down there. I worked South Texas for quite a while. Ended up moving into West Texas. So if you know where like Midland, Odessa is, and you drive, a couple hours west of there, there's the Delaware Basin, which is a a very prolific play that's booming right now. But we were drilling exploration Wolfcamp wells at the time. So I got to go be out on some of these very first original wells, where there's basically no oil and gas infrastructure in place. And now out there, it's absolutely wild. But so I worked all over Texas. I lived in Houston, lived in Austin, always worked for the most part South Texas or the Midland Basin, or basically the Permian Basin, which you probably hear the most about, which is in West Texas. What ended up happening is that some guys that I worked with at Anadarko Petroleum, they had just formed a new company. It was a private equity backed oil and gas company with a PE firm out of Houston. And they had leased a significant acreage position on the eastern flanks of the Powder River Basin here in Wyoming. And they were looking for an operations guy to come in and help. And so, I left Austin in 2019 to move up to Wyoming here. Became a partner in this oil and gas company. And I was handling the day-to-day operations of the company. And we ended up taking over another oil company that was based out of Gillette at the end of 2019. But really the story, or the intro into Bitcoin mining, which is really what this is about, is that, we had drilled an exploration well at the end of 2018. And like I said, this was on the eastern flanks of the Powder River Basin. It was a pure play exploration well. We were trying to prove that this part of the basin could work for oil and gas operations. So, the way that exploration kind of works is that it's typically smaller, private companies that are willing to put some risk up to try to extend or prove where the basin kind of goes to, where the plays go to. And so you're typically trying to get in at lower acreage costs. And then you put your money up to drill one or two or a few exploration wells and delineate your position and see what you've got. And then the game plan is, can you run it yourself, and can you develop that play? Or at that point, then have you sparked the interest of some of these major companies to, flip it over to them and, kind of go do the business model again, is to try to pick up new positions. So 18 drilled this well. Early 2019, we brought it online. And, Wyoming has a regulation or a ruling on how long you're allowed to flare gas for. And so, it's typically, say, you're allowed to flare for 30 days. You can get extensions on that. But you have to have kind of a plan in place as to, once you get to a certain day, you have to be under a certain amount of gas that can be flared, which is 60 MCF, or you're going to basically be having your well shut in. And so the problem for us is that we're in a remote area. No other oil and gas operators are really operating around us. So there's no infrastructure in place. We had just drilled this well, brought it online, and obviously we need the data for the well to be online to prove our position. But not only that, that's our revenue stream as well that's coming in. We need to pay off our investment of drilling this well. But the cost to build a pipeline out to these super remote areas when there's no infrastructure, like it's very hard to justify on, especially on an initial exploration well. It's just, you need to see this well data first before you put any more capital into it, or it could really, really hamstring your organization. And so, we were looking at everything we could do to keep our well online. And that was when, in early 19, we started talking about, well, there's another group here. He's actually a partner in J Energy now, Adam Sarvey. They had one of the very first Bitcoin mines. Actually, I think it was the very first Bitcoin mine off a natural gas well in Wyoming. And, talking with groups like that as to what they were doing, we said, well, let's give this a shot and see, if we can reduce our flare volume, get it under that 60 MCF a day threshold so that we can continue to flare the well. And then we can keep our well online. So we did do that. We put a Bitcoin mine on our site in 19. And at the time, I really wasn't that concerned, or to be honest, really cared that much about what was happening on the Bitcoin side. My oil production was flowing, and that's all I needed. And so that was our introduction to it. And then J Energy, basically we took our learnings from, what worked, what didn't, how can we scale, what would prevent us from scaling if we kept this similar business model, built things like this. So, and that was really the start of the company to go from there.
What usually happens so you say, you have like an exploration well and you've got 30, 60 days to flare. Like, what else are you how do you manage that in normal circumstances?
Yeah,
What
it's
happens?
hope to try to get extensions and prove that, look, this is an exploration well. This is going to bring, if the data is good, we're going to put more investment into this area, which more investment means more oil production, which means more taxes for the state. So you try to make a pitch as to why you should get an extension. And, long term, if the data looks good, you'll show them, here's our plan in place. Here's the midstream group we're working with, or the pipeline that we will build. That's typically the route that you go down, is to say, here is our development plan. Here's what we would do if this works out well. We just need more time.
Yeah. And so what normally happens with the natural gas that would be flared off? How, like in an operating well, what happens to that? Like,
yeah,
in this scenario?
So like, if you don't have a pipeline in place, your option is basically just to flare it. So
pipeline, otherwise, like a bigger operation, a pipeline takes that natural gas. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So, I mean, if you go into the heart of any oil and gas field or basin, there's going to be pipelines, gathering systems all in place. So typically the way it works is you'd have an operator, an E&P, like an oil company, who they would have a full field gathering system where all of their wells that they drill or own all kind of meet up into one central delivery point for the most part. There's, you might have multiple delivery points that get into the same system, but, you'd have then a sales or a custody transfer spot within your field where, hey, this is our sales meter. Once gas goes from, this place to this place, it right. transferred on to the midstream group that you sell it to, which then from there, they take it to their gas plants, which eventually then gets down to, a power plant, or at the end of the day, down to your home for heating.
Gotcha. And do most jurisdictions have some sort of regulation on flaring like this? Like you have a certain amount of time period to prove the resource, and then you got to figure something else out?
Yeah, every state has a certain rule. Wyoming's probably one of the more, they're one of the more regulated ones. Wyoming's only flaring about 0.2% of their total gas production, and it's continuing to drop. Texas and North Dakota historically have been kind of one of the most lax as far as what you're capable or allowed to do and how long you can flare for. Texas is getting more stringent as well. You've got some guys in the industry like Scott Sheffield, who's he's been the CEO or head guy at Pioneer, which is one of the largest oil producing companies in the United States. Guys like him are starting to get very vocal about the oil and gas industry within ourselves should regulate flaring. There's no reason that we should be flaring, because it only hurts our business when you think about it. One, you're taking a natural resource and setting it on fire. Like, it has value. It's ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. But two, it's ammo for environmental groups and investment groups that want to have an ESG or environmental story within their portfolio. It basically makes it so that there's a lack of investment in the industry. And you've seen that over the last couple of years, that the oil and gas industry has been severely hampered by the amount of investment dollars that have come in the industry. And now with oil prices dropping during COVID, a very small lack or investment coming into the oil and gas industry, that's why you're seeing natural gas and oil prices booming now, is because people haven't been drilling wells because there's a lack of funding to do it. And the investment community is basically forcing oil and gas to live within their cash flows now. Whereas, previous years, kind of the motto has been oil production kind of at any cost. So people have been, standing up rigs all over their field, drilling these wells, knowing that they don't necessarily have to put the infrastructure in place, especially in, North Dakota or Texas, where their flaring rules are more lax. So you can get oil production online very quickly, not worry about your gas, and start getting a return on your investment really quickly. But that's changing now. So companies are being forced.
Is it right to, if I'm hearing you correctly, so because of these regulations and this relatively short time period to prove a resource, is that why you see explorers and people who are putting in these types of wells to try to find resources coalesce around existing resources, because the infrastructure is there and the risk is less, and if they find something, they plug in right away and they're within the time frame of the regulations? But because of that, do you see, I mean, it stands to reason you'd see less exploration in newer resources or further away from the infrastructure. And if Bitcoin mining really is a solution where you can not only eliminate that waste, but monetize that waste at source so that you have ostensibly an infinite time period to prove the resource if you have the capital and it's worthwhile to do so, then would this not create kind of a boom in oil and gas exploration just because it allows you to adhere or conform to the regulations as they exist today?
Yeah, so I think I look at it a lot differently than probably anyone else in the Bitcoin mining natural gas space. And when I say I mean we at J Energy. Our business model is different. We're not targeting flare gas within our company. And so, and I can speak to that a little bit, but yeah, I would
Sure.
say that right now in oil and gas, that there's very, very few exploration wells being drilled. And it comes back down to the lack of investment within the industry over the last couple of years, is that people are pretty much only drilling wells right now that have the ability to go to sales right away. They need that absolute return on their investment. They're being forced to live within their cash flows, which a business should be forced to live within your cash flow. Like what's happened over the last 10 years in the shale oil and gas industry, it's just been, it's almost kind of like the same as, the money printing that's been going on over the last couple of years within the government. Like these oil companies have gotten, massive infusions of investments, drilling wells that, to get production up at their highest pace that they can, but not necessarily having a long-term strategy or vision as to, necessarily a return on their dollars. And so there's a lot of companies that went bankrupt over the last couple of years. Oil prices hit negative last April, but they're, for a lot of 2020 were, in the $30 range. And, many companies went bankrupt because they were just over leveraged. But yeah, what you're seeing now is, companies, like you said, just they're drilling wells that they can put to sell. We got $5 natural gas. We haven't had this for years, like nobody's going to be drilling a well that they can't put that gas to sales right now.
Right. But to the point about, the option for Bitcoin mining, you don't think that's going to enhance like the vigor around exploration in the future?
No, I don't think so. Maybe to an extent or a little bit, but there's a lot of challenges with targeting new wells for Bitcoin mining. And so, my personal opinion is that the Bitcoin mining that takes place in the oil and gas space, on when people say stranded or flared gas, it is going to be literally on wells that just don't have the ability to get to sales, or on wells that are, very close to the rules or regulations that allow them to flare. And so, for example, like, in Wyoming, if you can flare up to 60 MCF a day on a well, if you've got a well that only produces 90 MCF a day of gas, well, now build a Bitcoin mine for 30 or 40 MCF and flare the rest of that gas. Bitcoin mining won't solve flaring, because in order to ensure that your Bitcoin mine doesn't have stranded capital, which basically means that your generator's fully loaded and all of your ASIC miners that you own are all running, you'll never build a Bitcoin mine for the peak production, because that production declines. And so if you're going to be Bitcoin mining off flare gas, you have to build that mine for, a significantly smaller portion of what that well is capable of producing, or you run the risk of having stranded capital yourself. And so you're always going to have some amount of gas that's going to be flared for the most part, unless you want to run that risk. So like, for example, the overwhelming majority of gas that's being flared across the United States is on newly drilled wells, because I don't know if you've ever seen like a decline curve on what a well's production looks like over the life of its time. So like right now, probably 90+% of all oil and gas wells being drilled are in tight rock or like shale. And so the production profile on these shale wells is, it's a hyperbolic decline. So you've got peak production, in the first 30, 60, 90 days, and that well is going to drop it and it's going to decline off in, 50% in the first 12 months. And then you won't get under a 10% decline for the first 5 to 7 years of the well's life. So you're dropping double-digit declines on these wells' production for the first, 5 to 7 years,
Right.
Like, so if you try to build a Bitcoin mine for that amount of gas, you can't do it for the peak. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? So
So you're
you
saying
still
you got to
have,
find the sweet spot that is the
yeah,
right place in the curve, which necessitates the fact that you're going to be flaring anyways, right? Because
exactly.
you're building out for a lower capacity.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
And,
makes total sense.
so, and then the other stat to kind of look at is like, you know, um, if you look at the total volume of gas that's being flared, it's a substantial amount, like absolutely massive amount of gas. So like in 2019, I think it was something about close to like 1.5 billion cubic feet a day of gas, which when you convert to the power potential of natural gas, and then you look at, how big of how much power basically could you make? It could be like half to 3/4 of the entire Bitcoin network worth of power, which then you go, there's an unlimited amount of gas and power here. But then when you break it down to, well, I need my Bitcoin mine to be sustainable long term and to be scalable. Where can I park this in one spot where I don't have to continue to move and chase? It gets significantly harder. So like take Wyoming, for example. Obviously I lived here, so I've dug into it, super in depth, and, oil and gas data is public, so you can look into it. There's 40,000 wells in Wyoming. In 2020, the average day we flared, about 12 million cubic feet a day of gas. When you convert that into like the power potential, that's about 50 megawatts of power a day, which when you look at like some of the largest public mining companies right now that are out there, 50 megawatts is about what some of them are running at. They're scaling to 100, scaling to 200. They're getting bigger than that, but 50 megawatts is a substantial size Bitcoin mine. So you go, that's gas that's just being set on fire, right? Well, then you look at, well, what are some of the smallest natural gas Bitcoin mines? And, about 20, 40, 60, 100 kilowatts. Like these are, quite small Bitcoin mines. But you look at, say, I want a well that does, 50 MCF, which is about 60 kilowatts. So, we were talking 50 megawatts. Now I'm talking 60 kilowatts, right? Like a small engine generator. If I wanted to have a Bitcoin mine that sat in one spot for 365 days of the year, and I wanted it to only be 60 kilowatts of the 50 megawatts that Wyoming is flaring, there's 11 wells that I could have done that on. And so you kind of understand where I'm coming with, like the scalability problem gets really tough. Like, so out of 50 total megawatts, I want to build a Bitcoin mine on natural gas that can run 365 days of the year. There's only 11 wells that I could have put that on. And the size of it, would have been the equivalent to, if I wanted to build out on those 11 wells, 34 petahash, which 34 petahash, is about 1.5, let's just call it 1.5 megawatts worth of miners. So out of that whole 50 megawatts, there's only 1.5 megawatts that I could have mined 365 days of the year.
Right.
So, that was the story of J Energy is really that data. It's not that we don't think that flare gas Bitcoin mining has a place. It absolutely does. It's just that we recognize the challenge and the issues with chasing single wells for building a Bitcoin mine on, and that, we want it to be scalable. We want it to be long-term in one position. We wanted the ability to continue to grow. And, we just looked at it as saying, hey, that's just not going to be our business model. There's some people that are doing a great job of it and some people that are successful on it, but it's just not the course that we wanted to basically utilize,
So remind me again, what is your business model then?
Yeah. So we're finding, full field gathering systems, say an operator's full field that they've got all of their gas being tied into. We're finding, tail ends of gas plants, midstream lines where, there's a significant abundance of natural gas, and trying to find where there is some of the cheapest gas out there that's already clean, processed, abundant, that we can then set our site up and utilize the gas to scale up from there.
And so are you basically buying gas that these producers don't really have a market for or can't get the price you're offering? Like why sell to you versus whatever grid or infrastructure they're already connected to?
Yeah, and so like I'd already mentioned, so the actual like power potential of natural gas, um, you can create a significant amount of power off of natural gas. So like, you know, some of the largest Bitcoin mining companies in the world, let's say they're at 100 megawatts. Well, what does it take to get to 100 megawatts of natural gas? It's 24 million cubic feet a day. And you can drill one Haynesville well, one Marcellus well, one Utica well, and they'll come on at more than 24 million cubic feet a day. And so, we looked at this as it's not hard to find gas that we can scale up and build on. So yeah, we're trying to find people that, have had, bad contracts historically with midstream groups that they're selling to, or, have an abundant amount of gas that they're willing to sell some, it's a minute portion of overall streams that we're utilizing, but it can scale to a massive size Bitcoin mine. And so, that's kind of our business model is that, locking in deals that we can get, what is an abundant supply of gas for us to build a very large natural gas mine, but not in the overall picture of gas that's being produced.
Right. And their their incentive to sell to you versus someone else at a higher price, let's say, is just because of the term and the consistency and all these things that you're going to them and say, look, we'll have a purchase agreement for, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, at this rate or at this calculation of the rate. And from their perspective, they're thinking like, well, this is great. It's a foundation or a consistent revenue stream in a mix of shorter terms and less reliable and all this kind of stuff. Is that their thing?
Yeah, I mean, basically we act as like a midstream group. That's really what we are. Is just so it depends on when you can lock contracts in, when your contracts were placed, that sort of thing. So luckily we started doing this earlier this year. Obviously natural gas prices are they're at some of the highest levels they've been in a decade, but still that's exactly like kind of you mentioned it. It's being approaching them and saying we're going to treat it like a midstream group. We'll purchase gas, and this is how the deal can be. But on top of that, so we've got our own mine that we have here in Wyoming, but we do act as like a service company as well. So not only are we self-mining, but we build all of our containers and everything in-house in Casper. And we are oil and gas guys. Everybody on our team is from the oil and gas industry. And we're just trying to teach producers as well, as to say, like, look, when you think Bitcoin mining, you don't need to just think flare gas. Like take some small, minute portion of your actual natural gas stream. We can build a Bitcoin mine for you on your site. And you can realize, right now you can realize 5 to 10x on top of what the natural gas market is if you Bitcoin mine. And so we're saying, divert some portion of your gas stream, we'll build a Bitcoin mine on it. And you can capture that arbitrage value difference right now where, the overwhelming majority is going to go down your sales line. You can fund all of your Bitcoin mine operating expenses with that, plus you're still making money also just sending it down the sales line. And now you can say capture $30 to $35 in MCF Bitcoin mining off that, call it 0.5%, 1% of your gas stream. And if you hold on to that Bitcoin that you mined, because you don't have to sell it, well, today it's worth $30 to $35 in MCF, but it's like having, an ability to store your natural gas in a cavern. You're converting it into digital form. And next year, if Bitcoin doubles, now that molecule of gas or that MCF unit volume could be worth $70 in MCF and continue to appreciate in the future. So that's kind of how we looked at it. It's not a knock on flare gas Bitcoin mining. It's not that it can't be done. We understood a lot of the challenges with it, especially with single wells. Our well in particular, we had like what a pump jack is or a pumping unit. Like it looks like a horse, strokes up and down. You've got a lot of issues that can go wrong on these wells. You can break rods on it and downhole pump issues, hole in your tubing. So you've got to get rigs out to fix your well. And if your well's down, your Bitcoin mine's down. So now you've got two pieces of stranded capital. And if you're not the owner of the well, and you're just putting your Bitcoin mine on some producer's well, well, you're beholden to them getting their production back online. So if they say, yeah, we're busy, we're not getting to it, or, it's going to cost too much to get this well online, you're looking for the next spot to go.
Right.
So, we ran into a lot of those kind of issues where it's just, look, we had broken rods. You got to get a rig out under a well to fix it. In the meantime, our Bitcoin mine's down. And if you're chasing flare gas, we talked about the, hyperbolic declines on these wells. Is that, how do you build that size? And, almost every well's drilled with the intentions to put it to sales. And so, the average well flares, 14, 25, 30, 60 days of the year. And then it's put to sales because these guys are drilling wells, bringing them online right away to see what the potential of the well is, to make sure that their facilities are built for that well's production. So you're making sure that you can get your production on, get some data points, you're building out the facilities and the infrastructure, and then that well goes to sales. So you're either having to find a completely stranded well that has downstream issues that you have no ability to ever put it to sales and mine Bitcoin off that, or you're chasing new wells and constantly moving that Bitcoin mine to the next well, to the next well, to the next well, which, that's a lot of people's business models. And, that's fine. It's just, we looked at it as Jay, as just, we want to reduce our risks and our downtime. So, when you look at, Wyoming in particular, like I was going on some of those stats, there's 2,200 wells in Wyoming that had some amount of gas that was being flared. And that amount of gas total there was average, 50 million cubic feet a day, which is a significant amount of gas, 200 megawatts worth of gas. But when 12 million cubic feet a day, which is 50 megawatts worth of gas. But when you actually try to find wells to do it on, it just gets, slim pickings for wells that were actually online. Like I said, there's 11 wells that were on for 365 days of the year. And then I say, well, I want 90% runtime. And then that goes to about 30 wells. So it gets really tough.
So it's just more reliable, and your business model is just going to producers and saying, hey, how about diversifying your customer base effectively, and we'll buy this much gas at this rate for this long. How about it? Is that basically it?
Yeah, pretty much. We've got our own site that we've built that we pull gas off of a midstream line, basically. But yeah, then we're also helping producers and midstream groups say, hey, look, why would you not diversify your portfolio and have some exposure into Bitcoin?
And how do those conversations go, right? Because, Bitcoin's 12, 13 years old. It's new to a lot of people, particularly in probably this industry. I don't know if you're on the sales side of things, but what's generally what are those boardroom conversations or telephone conversations like?
I think obviously us being oil and gas guys, and, our whole career has been, my background, like I said, is oil and gas operations. Like I've been on site my whole career for the most part, or working as an engineer in the office, but in operations roles. And so, my other partner, he's a landman, but / lawyer. So he's been an oil and gas attorney his whole career. And our other partner has been a landman as well. And so, we just look at it as, we know what oil and gas companies want. We know what their risk appetite is. We know what the things are that concern them, what the things are that they kind of want to hear. And so I think that we can do a really good job of explaining to them as to, here's how you can make this fit and work in your business model. The volatility of Bitcoin is by far the biggest hamper into it. When you're not just necessarily dealing with flare gas, and, the majority of companies that do mine off flare gas will, use older ASIC miners. So, S9s are definitely more popular than trying to put, say S19s out on a site that has the chance of going down or offline, or, some of the issues that we potentially talked about. And so when you're trying to talk to them about, taking their full field gathering system or a midstream line or a gas plant or things like that, and diverting some portion, you're pitching to them to say, like, you should be putting, some of the newer gen miners out here, well, the investment gets pretty high. And then you look at the volatility of, what Bitcoin's done, or what the, profitability. So basically your dollars per terahash profitability is over time. It can be a little bit tougher of a sell. They're like, we're already in a volatile industry. Look at what oil and gas has done in the last 2 years. It's went from negative oil price to, pushing 80 right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so they understand the volatility and the risk, but I think the biggest thing is just the investment to get into Bitcoin mining at some amount of scale, and then trying to understand, like, is that something that we want to be a part of? But over the last year, the conversations have definitely changed. I think
receptive.
that there's just such a significant arbitrage difference between, what you can traditionally sell your gas for, even though gas prices are at, some of the highest levels they've been in the last decade. The amount that you can make off of Bitcoin mining is still substantial compared to that. We're talking multiples different. And you hope that holds up and stays, but to say that it absolutely will, I think that's not necessarily a good business model either. But
So just to clarify, are you selling them the containers, with the ASICs, and then they mine on their own and they take the profits, or are you negotiate an agreement where you put the container on site and you purchase the power, or is it both?
Yeah. So first and foremost, our 95% of our business model is we're self miners. So we source gas ourselves, build our own site. It's our investment to build our containers out. We're buying our miners, we're mining ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we do have the ability to build containers, source miners, and everything for producers as well. And so, there's multiple different ways that we can structure those deals. And one being, some producers say, look, I just want containers, help me source the miners, we'll figure it out. And you've got some guys that are like, we don't want to understand how this works at all, and we'll work out some kind of a management fee or structure for you guys to, do everything from building, getting it up and running, handling custody, all of that sort of thing, making sure any cash outs or payments or anything that we want to do on it, just handle the whole thing for us. So when something goes wrong, you send your techs out and fix it. There's multiple different ways that we can structure those kind of deals. But like I said, first and foremost, we're mining ourselves, and that's by far our biggest focus.
Sure. You got to think that the more mainstream Bitcoin becomes, the more people are going to want to hold on to that coin, right? Like, sure, it's just a guaranteed purchase agreement for power is great, but when people start to realize the value of Bitcoin, they're going to be like, hold on a sec, maybe we should have this on our balance sheet. Maybe we should be accumulating this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the things we looked at too, is to, how did we want to build this model out? And I kind of looked at it in my career. It was very tough pill to swallow if you knew you're selling your gas to someone that was making more off of it than you were. If you found that out with a midstream contract, you wouldn't enter that contract again. And so there definitely needs to be some kind of a balance that everybody's being fairly compensated for what they're bringing to the table. And like you said, there's definitely I think, long term, you're going to see, or in the future, significantly more and more companies devoting resources themselves to Bitcoin mining when they see that there's groups that have the ability to monetize off of their product more than they are.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally. What do you make of, we discussed kind of the price, the volatility in the price of oil and gas, and, power and energy shortages all around the world, the imposition of ideologies from our, centralized overlords all over the world, pretty much, on what energy is moral and good and what energy is not. What is your perspective on, not only that whole thing, but how it impacts your business specifically? Like, do you guys get any have any negative consequences as a result of, these policies that are affecting oil and gas producers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was part of our business plan and model to be based out of Wyoming, and that's for a reason. Wyoming's definitely one of the most energy friendly states. in terms of oil and gas and, you know, natural resource development. There's a significant amount of coal mining here. So there's definitely some advantages of being in a state that's pro energy, which Wyoming is probably one of, if not the most pro energy state here. But on top of that, Wyoming has a lot of, you know, obviously pro Bitcoin stance here. You've got Senator Lummis here. The University of Wyoming is really, you know, pushing initiatives as well. You know, and it was one of the first states to really start doing some Bitcoin mining off flare gas. And I think the WGCC, which is the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission, you know, they recognize it as well. So you've got, you know, entire regulatory bodies, politicians, you know, the Wyoming, you know, business authority, like everybody recognizes what Bitcoin mining can bring to the table. And I think Wyoming understands that, you know, as more and more policies get driven to try to basically hamper fossil fuel development, that it makes sense for them to try to be at the forefront of Bitcoin as well. And so I think you're seeing them do that. So, you know, it wasn't a fluke that we're based out of Wyoming at all, or that this is where we wanted to be or where we were going to put our first mine. You know, it was 100% based on basically risk mitigation for ourselves.
Yeah. What? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Wyoming these days, and you know, I love the videos of Lummis in you know, railing on, you know, central banking or money printing and that kind of stuff. It's amazing. What's it like there? How's life been like? I mean, like I said at the beginning, I see photos of you living your best life, you know, out in the wilderness and doing all sorts of great, you know, family activities. But, you know, how are you feeling about it? You know, everything there.
Yeah, I mean, I love it here. I think, you know, I've said it numerous times to people, and it's not a ploy or a tactic. Like, it's true, is that if all things went to hell, I'd find anything I could do to stay in Wyoming. You know, I wouldn't want to leave here. So I grew up right on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. Like I mentioned, it's a small town of about 2,000 people. And, you know, actually that's where both of us are from. And so, you know, my kid was born in Calgary, but, you know, she just turned 1. But, you know, so we're both from small towns and, you know, small farming families, oil and gas families. You know, I think we recognize, you know, the advantages to raising your family in a small town and small communities with, and when I say like-minded people, I don't want to be put into echo chambers, for sure. You know, diversity of opinion and a thought is very important to me, to make sure that, you know, you're not going down a path that you're being led down only because you're around people that think the same way as you. You know, I want to be, I consider myself to be a pretty challenging person, ideological wise. Like I want to challenge any thought or opinion. And I you know, love that people will do it with me as well. But, you know, there's something to be said for the people of Wyoming and, you know, how proud they are to be here. I like to say that the people that are here in Wyoming are here by choice. You know, not everybody can cut it in this state. You've got some harsh winters. You've got a lot of blue collar work. You've got a lot of tough work when it comes to, you know, coal mining, oil and gas industry. You know, it's people that have kind of chosen to be here. And so it's good to be in a place that people are proud to be where they're from or where they're living. And with that being said, you know, I'd say Wyoming probably rivals any other state on, you know, live your life the way you want to live it. And we're going to infringe as least as possible as we can on your, you know, your life, liberty, and property. And I think that, you know, there's something to be said for living in a place like that. But then add on to it, you know, we're both major outdoors people. You know, I think what most people outside of the oil and gas industry don't hear from the oil and gas industry the most is that most oil and gas guys absolutely love the environment. You know, they're typically very outdoorsy people.
Yeah.
They hunt, they fish, they understand conservation. They, you know, they would never want to do something that pollutes their water stream because they pull from it and drink from it. You know what I mean? Like, so, you know, that's kind of the life that we live. You know, we want to be out hunting, you know, in the winter. I'm going out hunting later this afternoon. You know, we want to grow our, you know, we got a garden here. We got chickens running around the property. You know, in the weekends, we want to take our camper up into the mountains. We live right in the base of the Bighorn. So we're, you know, 10, 15 minutes from being in the mountains here. So we go camping all the time. And so, I've lived in the big cities. I lived in Houston for a while. I lived in Austin for a while, and it's great. But to be honest, I was back in Houston this past week. I was in Houston and Dallas for some meetings this week, and man, I couldn't get out fast
Fuck this
enough.
shit.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
man, you certainly seem to be living like the type of life that a lot of Bitcoiners these days seem to be aspiring to. They want to be in big open spaces that are, pristine nature, where they can do many of the activities that you just referenced, where there's enough space, where people leave them alone, where there's, strong communities and that kind of thing. And why would you not want that? I mean, I think it's
yeah,
been
exactly.
a perversion of not just the fiat system, but the every time you push towards, I guess, as we move into a more modern life, like things maybe get overstepped, right? And you could say the industrial revolution and the industrialization of economies led to these really dense cities where everyone was piled into the same place. And we may now be seeing a reversion to, back to something as a result of the decentralization of work and the, less necessity to be in the same place physically and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it seems like a no brainer, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to live by like a clean
Yeah,
stream and fresh air and lots of nature and animals? And why would you not want to be both, kind of live off of your land or the land nearby and therefore be a better steward of it? These ideas are
exactly.
so lacking in most people's minds today. Like all you see is people on social media or in the street protesting, climate change or this and that, and they have no real connection to the environment that they're living in. They're doing all that from a Starbucks or something.
Yeah, and I took where I grew up and was raised for granted for sure. I rode my bike out in the country, or eventually grew up and get whether it's dirt bikes or whether it's quads or snowmobiles in the winter or whatever, and you've got the ability to just kind of be free and do what you want. And then the mindset when you grew up in a small town is kind of like, went to college and moved to the city, and I lived in some
Right.
smaller towns obviously as well, but it was just kind of like that seemed like the natural progression of what you do. But yeah, once I got to Wyoming to look after our operations for this oil company up here, it was just, man, you can't make me move out of here. Because we talk about it all the time. We're like, we're coming off the mountain, or we're leave where our house is, and there's a pond not too far from here, and the neighbor kids are riding their bikes with their fishing poles, and they're all meeting up from their the nearest houses and congregating and going fishing and stuff, and you're like, this is
Life
just
ain't so bad.
yeah, it's just things slow down a little bit, and I think you start to have an appreciation for not the hustle and bustle of life, but more so just the little things where you can sit out on the deck and see the stars at night, or things like that. It sounds kind of wishy-washy or whatever, but I'll be
Not
honest,
at all,
once you
man. It sounds fucking rational as shit, And
yeah,
I think it
it's
does
just
to a lot of people listening too.
yeah, I think it can ground you for sure. I think
Yeah.
you hear people talk about what psychedelics or something like that might do for people, and I think the way you hear people talk about that, I think you could probably argue moving to out in the country can kind of ground you that same way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's also something to be said for the overlap between those two things, where it just kind of it brings you back to an encounter with what is real, what is truthful,
Right.
what is naturally awe-inspiring and beautiful, which
Yeah.
is nature and the stars and areas of your unconscious or consciousness in the case of psychedelics. But no, I couldn't agree more. But I don't like. There's only 500,000 people or something in Wyoming, right? The whole
Yeah.
state.
It's yeah,
Why are
not
there
very
so
many
few
at all.
people there?
I don't know. I mean, I think that would be, more of a policy director's opinion on that. But at least from, my take on it would be, you've got Colorado just to the south, Denver there, that, people want to live in cities. I think people want to
Yeah.
have, the things that cities have to offer. And, I think if you look at like wind maps or things like that of the state of Wyoming, it can get pretty tough in the winter, especially, the wind can blow in a lot of places. And then also, like we were talking about, the main driver of the economy, it's not like it's a big financial hub or center that, you know, you've got all these big banks or something like that that have, huge, massive corporate head offices here. It's like, this is where the work gets done.
Right.
Other states and other places are based on,
People don't want to
they're
work really these days.
yeah, they're
That,
taking the
in
money
that way.
from they're taking the money or the accounting or whatever of where the work gets done and basing it out of a hub where it may be more attractive potentially to live for the larger population. But
Right.
Wyoming's where the real actual boots are on the ground, and coal's being mined, oil wells are being drilled, like.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the majority of it.
Do you have any feelings or fear that, federally things may be imposed on states as a result of, the whole mess of things that are happening these days? Like, we talk about as this sovereign individual thesis plays out, and there may be a balkanization where,
Right.
more freedom-minded people go to these places that preserve or revere those same principles, and then people who don't will stay behind or go to the other places. Is there any concern or I guess sense on the ground that like it's susceptible to being changed from the outside?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a concern. And I think that COVID has probably showed that there's an appetite amongst some groups to take as much control or power over as big of land swaths or constituents as possible. So I think it's definitely a risk for certain places or, in the future. I just think being in a place like Wyoming or, South Dakota, some of these states, if there's going to be a last place that resists it the most, or that it doesn't happen to, I think that these are probably your best shots or best bets at it.
Mhm.
So we'll see. I mean, I think what we've seen over the last 18 or 20 months is probably to say that there's going to be more and more power federally try to be mandated over the states. I think if you said no, I don't see that coming, I think you're probably a little bit out of your mind.
Yeah, I agree. What was we didn't really touch on it yet, but what was your Bitcoin rabbit hole story? Because it sounds like it kind of kicked off for you in 18, 19 when you started looking at just through the lens of energy needs and the flaring
Yep.
stuff. But, tell me a bit about your exposure and how your thinking on things have changed as a result of falling down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, I kick myself that I didn't read up on it obviously more and study more on it, because it was once, in my opinion, is that people need to self-educate or have the ability to want to listen to somebody talk about it and really understand it before you can really go in on it. But if you can take the time to actually be educated on it and take the time to understand what people are trying to say about it, I think that it's impossible to deny the positive benefits of Bitcoin and how it works. I think that most people are just the same way that I was at the time. It was just like you just had preconceived notions and you're busy with whatever else you've got going on in life. And, I just don't want to learn about that right now. I've got other stuff going on that I care about. So yeah, for me, it was, we put it on our site in 19. And like I said, I didn't really care about it. It was my oil production was online, and that was my goal. That was what I needed, was that, our investment was in this well. And in order to, get a return on my investment and to, potentially drill more of these wells, I needed my oil flowing. And Bitcoin just happened to be, something that helped me do that, like any other piece in the process of getting an oil and gas well online. And so for me, it was the big moment. It wasn't that I didn't have an account that I may have, started buying some Bitcoin on and trying to trade it, looking at it that way. But for me, the big aha moment was when COVID hit, and seeing the government's reaction and the insane stimulus bills. And that's when it was just, reading what was happening and trying to understand what is going on and what is the future impact on our economy based on this. Because, if you understand any type of monetary policy, like what was happening there, all it takes is for you to be introduced to Bitcoin at that point in time to realize that this fixes that, right? And so for me, it was definitely, COVID hit, stimulus packages, and me trying to find a way to protect myself, knowing that I feel like this isn't going to end well. And, I didn't have, I've stayed off social media for as much as I could for the last few years. I didn't have a Twitter account. I don't have Instagram, Facebook, anything like that. So it wasn't until early this year that I actually
Found
even
Bitcoin Twitter.
downloaded Twitter. I didn't have a Twitter prior to that. So for me though, it was really just, trying to read more about, what can I do to protect myself? And, obviously my business partner, Justin Ballard, he was at me with me at our oil company. And, he was already talking this route as well, kind of at the same time. And that's where it just started consuming as many podcasts and articles and everything that I could. And that's where it was just no turning back after that.
Yeah. Do, the people you speak to in the industry, just as part of your normal, operations of the business that you're building, how do they feel about the level of government intervention, especially since COVID, right? All this money printing and how destabilizing it might be to energy prices, economy in general. Like, are these conversations happening in that domain as well? Because obviously Bitcoin is its own echo chamber. And as much as I think we all try to be objective and challenge our assumptions and all that kind of stuff, I mean, that's very much a part of the ethos of the space. Some things seem so obvious to us that we just they don't get challenged. And I think largely we're correct in those assumptions, but I'm just wondering how much they're permeating the ex-Bitcoin sort of world, these concerns about intervention, money printing, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think, the oil and gas industry has faced a lot of pressure for quite a while. So, I would say, the Bitcoin industry, the majority of people in it first heard ESG probably earlier this year. I would say it was kind of around, the whole Elon,
right,
thing. And people were going, well, what's an ESG? Whereas the oil and gas industry has been facing, environmental pushback forever. And it's gotten significantly stronger over the years where, over the last few years, you're seeing, a severe lack of investment in the space, the demonization of the fossil fuel industry. And I think that, the way the industry has tried to do is that, we'll do our best to, when I say the industry, I say oil and gas, is that, we'll do our best to educate people as much as we can and advocate for our industry and, how it actually does bring human flourishing. And, I think it helps that you get guys like Alex Epstein that aren't oil and gas industry people, trying to educate people on it as well. But to be honest, I think oil and gas's reputation over, the last 100 years has, big oil, people tend to just say that they have their best interests in mind. Of course they'd be advocating for their own industry. But I think when you've seen, a severe lack of investment in the industry, COVID hit and, oil prices really dropped. You've got, like I mentioned, we talked about in Canada, no new pipelines being built for years. But then the population and the human consumption and demand for energy goes up. And then you've got the build out of unreliable grid infrastructure, the shutdown of nuclear or natural gas or coal power plants. I think the oil and gas industry for years has been saying, we're just waiting for our "we told you so" moment. And I think that they've hoped that that wouldn't be the case. And they don't want to be the guy saying, hey, we told you this was going to happen. But I think you're starting to see it play out right now. Like, look at the power prices in Europe. Look at the price of natural gas in Europe right now. Look at what happens in California every summer. Look at what happened in Texas in February. You've got significant, unreliable or renewable grid infrastructure going up, and they're trying to treat it like a base load when it should only be in addition to the base load that we already have. And, you've got oil at pushing $80 a barrel, and you've got natural gas pushing $5-6 an MCF. I think that, we have a bad winter this year across the United States. I think it could be hell for a lot of people. And I think you're going to see people that are going to be like, are we going to be choosing to buy natural gas for our home for heat? Or should we be choosing to buy electricity for our house? Which one should we be choosing, because we can't afford both? Which I think there's a realistic situation that there's going to be some people, or significantly more people, in that position due to the lack of investment in traditional fossil fuel industries and the, massive investment in, renewable or unreliables.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a perfect example of how ideology blinds you, right? Because
Right.
to the point that Alex Epstein makes, it's like with all this climate hysteria, well, show me the proof that energy mastery doesn't result in more human flourishing and less climate related deaths of human beings, right?
Yep.
And the data would seem to suggest that climate related deaths has been plummeting as we've basically adopted oil and gas and developed a mastery over energy, or continue to improve our ability to harness and convert and transfer energy. And somehow, and that doesn't penetrate the ideological arguments against certain forms of energy, right? Whereas what you just said, and I think this is borne out in many places where people don't have either any cheap, reliable energy, or it's becoming more and more precarious, that very real negative impact on human beings, right? Not being able to pay for heat and light, not being able to cook food, burning other sources of fuel that are health contaminants, let's say, or damaging to health and that kind of stuff, is just completely swept under the rug. Like there's no recognition that that is a very real and immediate, not something off in the future, impact on human life and health.
Yep, exactly. And the people that are pushing those, agendas are the ones that are running under the guise or the idea that they're there to help, lower class or lower income families, you know what I mean? And so it doesn't add up. It's
it's just another one of those crazy fiat perversions,
Yeah.
And another one, as you were saying, like how big oil has gotten a bad rap. The problem is like, on the one hand, you have, okay, the confluence of technology and market incentives looking for the best forms of energy to deliver them to the end consumer the most cheaply and the most reliable. That's great. And for a period of time, and seems like still is, that's oil and gas. No problems there whatsoever. But when you have the monolithic government that is fed by the fiat monetary spigot, well, the name of the game for any business or industry that gets to a certain size is to cozy up to it, because that's how you derive supra market benefits. And any industry of any significant size is going to try to do that, because it's almost like they have to continue to compete. Like if your competitor is going to do the cozying up, well, you got to cozy up. And then what you get is like all the biggest businesses, whereas maybe they would have had dominant market position, but would have been subject to market dynamics and churn at the top and normal change in monopolistic, dynamics, let's say. The cozying up really secures their space. And that's when you get, because it's easy to paint big oil badly. If you look at, the last 50 years, or let's just look at the Gulf War episodes throughout the last 30 years and say, well, how much of that, sure, there's geopolitical reasons and other, but how much of that was nudged by big oil? Probably not 0% of it. There was probably some involvement, right? And so that's easy to give it a bad rap. Hey, you're incentivizing war around the world and you're killing people and all that kind of stuff. But if the fiat monetary spigot wasn't there, if the governments weren't able to become this force that everyone had to cozy up to and wanted and derive benefit from influencing, then it would probably be, there'd be a lot less poor behavior, let's say, in that industry there, and it would get less of a bad rap. And people would probably look upon it very differently. They'd probably look upon it the way I look upon what you do. Like I see this, individual who's, humble, who's willing to do the hard work, who believes in the work they're doing, who wants to create a healthy life for themselves and their family, who wants to be stewards of their environment. Like there's nothing wrong with that narrative as far as I'm concerned. Right. But it gets polluted by the broader overstructure of where that industry sits.
Yeah. And the problem too is just that there's so much conflicting, media disinformation or just lack of awareness in people. Like, my biggest pitch on energy is like, yeah, I come from the oil and gas industry, so obviously I'm probably a little bit biased towards it, but at the same time, I'm pro all forms of energy. Like energy brings human flourishing. Like at the end of the day, that's what it does. But we all have to recognize the entire supply chain of, what it takes to make that unit volume of energy. How was it originally created? How is it shipped to the masses? How is it sustained? And then at the end of the day, how is it reclaimed? Because there's a full life cycle of energy. So whether it's, solar and you're mining off the start and you're using coal power plants, and then you're shipping it somewhere, and then you've got a life cycle of 10 to 15 years, and then you're sending it to a developing country to put it into a landfill when you're done with it, because places here in the United States or North America won't take it. Those are the conversations that need to be happening, is that every form of energy has positives, every form of energy has negatives, and every form of energy has a fit for purpose application depending on your location of where you're at. And that should be the conversation, is what is the best form of energy for your particular application and location. And at the end of the day, if something isn't sustainable, and when I say actually, so if something isn't profitable, it's not sustainable.
Right.
And right now, a lot of these forms of renewable energies are being put into areas that probably don't make them the most sense. They're being subsidized, so the economics work right now, but long term they may not be profitable or reliable, and that to me is not sustainable. But the whole pitch on a lot of these green projects are that it's the word sustainable is thrown out all the time, but if something isn't profitable at the end of the day, it's not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly the point. You say that should be part of the conversation, but I'd approach it a bit differently and say, the perversion that fiat creates in a market is that things should be determined by conversation. No, the market will determine what form of energy to use at what level and at what price, in what jurisdiction and what geographic area, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's not to be dictated, by decree,
Exactly.
i.e. fiat, that like, oh, well, solar panels should go here and wind turbines should go here. It's like, no, all these complex inputs will emerge from that, the answer to the question that you're holding in your mind, right? Not your imposition of your ideology on it. And so, I mean, we're just so far down the road where that is such a radical notion to people, right? It's like everything needs to be discussed and decided and fit into a certain narrative that is highly rife with ideological assumptions and ideological, objectives or imperatives. And I mean, sometimes I think it's a wonder things work at all. But at the same time, it's like things kind of are starting to break at the seams, because there's been so much imposition of ideology rather than human action elucidating what the solutions should be, and this is obviously a huge part of the hope of Bitcoin, is that we'll get back to a place where that is what determines the world we get. And I think we're all very excited for the amount of prosperity and the amount of peace and the amount of creativity and abundance and innovation that will happen as a result of that being unleashed. Because the more you impose ideology on people, the more you stifle that spirit of exploration and creativity. And the more you insist upon conformity to certain ideologies, hatched by certain people with the power to enforce them. And that's a stifling of the human spirit. There's no two ways about it, And so that's why it's interesting, I explore a lot on the pod, this idea of how Bitcoin is transforming people. And one of the elements, I think it's almost unavoidable, is that we're going to see a kind of a freeing of the human spirit once all the different things that are being imposed on them, socially and economically, are, if not completely removed, dramatically reduced, so that there's more space for their own spirit, their own creativity, their own mind to determine who they should be and what they should pursue and what they want to build and contribute to the world.
Yeah, I think, it's really interesting. I think Bitcoin is potentially, the greatest, education tool for how energy works. I think it's fair to say that there's probably nothing else in the world that over the last year or 2 years has taught people like entire supply chains of energy systems, or made them want to understand how they work, because it's become such a massive, pull to find, where is there the most energy being wasted? Where is there stranded energy? And what does that even mean? Like, the majority of people aren't aware that your electrical grid is creating more energy than is being pulled, because you need to make sure that that energy is there for the people that require it, and if demand goes up. And so, but that excess energy is just being wasted. And people, the average person, and it's not that people are stupid or don't get it, it's just, it's not something you think about in your day-to-day life. And so, people aren't aware that there's, hydro dams that, it's based on how much water they're backholding or putting through their system as to how much power is being created. But that doesn't mean that's what's actually being utilized downstream of them. Or that, in oil and gas, that there's, thousands of idled wells that aren't producing right now, that because they're not economic in, the current situation where, they don't have access to a pipeline, or the cost to produce that well, everything that's involved in it, or the liability on the well at the end of its life, it doesn't have an economic value in traditional oil and gas. But if you can bring the market to that wellhead and mine Bitcoin off of it, well, that changes things. And so, I think that people just are starting to understand or realize, energy systems a little bit more than they've used to. And I think that that's great that Bitcoin can help educate people, because at the end of the day, energy is what brings human flourishing. Like, I wholeheartedly believe that it brings prosperity. And going down the path of trying to kill the most efficient, or, the most reliable energy sources is taking us a step back and putting more harm to people than good. And so, I think that as more people adopt and educate themselves about Bitcoin, I really think that the energy system education probably comes along with that as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's also part of a broader attitude, especially amongst Bitcoiners, where, you want to check your assumptions. I mean, I think, as cliche as it sounds, like we're kind of all truth seekers, right? And it's like, I don't want to just take for granted this system that's so vital to my survival and everything. Like, I would like to understand it. Now, there's a million things to understand in the world. So there's a certain degree of prioritization and things you got to focus on, and things you maybe you can let other people focus on. But it definitely seems to be a trend where, Bitcoiners want to make up their own minds about things. And if you're going to do that sincerely, you need to have the right information. You need to understand things as well as possible, so that you can put it through your own filter and apply your own values and principles to it, and come up with something that's, that you believe in, right? That you think is the right approach to have. And I'm wondering, man, like, it sounds like in Wyoming, you're probably surrounded by a lot of people that share your perspective on this topic, at least. But has, going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and because a lot of this is the real trick, right? Like, if the assumption that, like, living in a fiat dominated culture has conjured up all these narratives that are untethered from reality, right? And as a result, like, most people are walking around with narratives and assumptions in their heads that are fairly divergent from the truth on the ground, right? The facts on the ground, and truth generally, let's say. And that's why I think part of the reason why, and again, I'll use Bitcoiners particularly, Bitcoiners start to learn about all these disparate things, and then they end up having divergent narratives from, what most people hold. And obviously that's kind of the creates a tribal aspect between the two factions, and, how Bitcoiners might clash ideologically with, the dominant social narrative, or whatever it may be. Has that been, at all intrusive or disruptive in your life, has your perspective on these things changed in the last couple of years as a result of these pursuits? And, has that influenced you in any sort of negative way?
I mean, I don't think so. Like, I think, and I just want to make sure I probably understand, like, what you're asking, I guess, the most on this, in terms of, like, being in Wyoming, are people kind of like-minded or thinking the same, or what are your
Yeah, I mean, fair point. Maybe that was a bit long-winded, but just to say that, if when you're seeking truth in a society that has gone way away from truth, you end up having kind of conflicting or confrontational perspectives to people. And Bitcoin, my impression is that being involved in Bitcoin and learning about it and having that permeate other things definitely amplifies that dynamic. And I'm just wondering, if that's been the case for you.
So I think, for myself personally, the last 18 or 20 months has been very interesting where, all of my family's in Canada. A large portion of my friends that I've grown up with or, went to college with or anything are still in Canada. And, there's major difference in ideology as to who has whose best interest in mind. Does the government have your best interest in mind? Do the public health authorities have their best interest in mind? And, what the average Canadian thinks versus what the average, Wyomingite thinks on those kinds of subjects or topics is drastically different. I would say that, I've kind of mentioned earlier that I can be a challenging individual, especially if I'm talking to people about things I'm passionate about. Ask any one of my friends or coworkers or anything like that, is that, I can get pretty fired up and I like to get my point across for sure. Probably, a little more aggressively than sometimes I should, but yeah, I've definitely faced challenges with that, within my own family even, or within friendships that, there's I look at people and say, I feel like you can't open your eyes on this. Like, you need to look around and see what's going on. And so I think that there's been, that sort of thing's for sure been a challenge, but and I think being around Bitcoiners, there's that inherent, I think the person that gets attracted to Bitcoin to start with, has an inherent, questioning,
Yeah.
sense within them. There's a longing for self-sovereignty and, liberty of everything that they have and lack of infringement and, things like that. So I think that, surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded Bitcoin wise, you are going to talk about a lot of the same things or have a lot of the same interests. I think that, definitely challenges for me, and it hasn't really been living in Wyoming, is I think that everyone in Wyoming is a Bitcoiner without knowing they're a Bitcoiner. These are the type of people that are going to be drawn to it. There's a lot of them just aren't aware of it yet.
Right.
But yeah, so I'd say in my personal life, definitely that, as I've went deeper down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, deeper down what's been happening over the last 18 to 20 months with a lot of the, theatrical performance of COVID, that it's challenged relationships for sure with that I've got, just because not everywhere, especially, Canadians don't think necessarily the same way on average, as probably, people here in Wyoming or myself thinks about a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I share those sentiments. I mean, it's tricky to navigate, right? Because you can be left with the feeling that you're living in different worlds, right? Like in your mind, like you're seeing the world completely differently. And
Yeah.
the issue is like, well, how do you bridge that gap as best as possible? Now, the best possible option might just be not to try and just to leave people alone, right? Let people that are seeing things so differently than yourself, just, kind of politely let them go about their business and hope they respect you the same way and allow them to do that. But
Yeah.
it's such a I guess it's such a weird time to be living in, because the views and perspectives can be so diametrically opposed. And, like one of them's more right than the other. And we're probably going to find out, but it's probably not going to be that pleasant, the finding out process. So.
Yeah, it's been tough. I mean, I've definitely been politely asked to quit sharing my opinions and thoughts with people that I'm close with, yeah, whether it's family or friends, or just, hey, we're sick of hearing what you think about it. Like, we're fine with how things are going. And that's fine if people are okay with it. But it's, the challenging thing for me has been that,
it's hard when it's people that you love, right?
Yeah. And that's the point I've tried to get across, is like, look, we've been in Wyoming. Our daughter, she's one, over the last year, she gets to go out and live a normal life, and strangers can hold her and she can interact, and nothing's closed down, and people congregate and get together, and it's not even a topic of conversation. And then, we look north, a 9-hour drive, and we've got family who, can't hang out with each other over Christmas legally. Like, there's only your household can be within your house over Christmas. And there's, grow up playing hockey in Canada outdoors, and the police are shutting down outdoor hockey games. And there's, just things like that where, it wasn't until July where Alberta officially opened up and they're already brought back restrictions again. And, the overwhelming majority of people are double vaccinated. And so it's very tough when I look at, I just say like, life doesn't have to be that way, or you don't have to, life can go on if you just choose to let it go on. And, it's frustrating me to see, I think what is happening up there, and to a lot of people, and it may be true, is they just go, look, it's not that big of a deal. Like, if we can't get together with 100 people, it doesn't bother us, or whatever. And then you go, okay, I understand that, but the fact that rule's there to begin with, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's just the difference between some people's personalities. And I think that, the average Canadian has an inherent trust within the government, that the government has their, best, what's best for them in mind. Whereas, I think a place like Wyoming, or, I think the United States definitely doesn't share that same inherent trust. I mean, that's the basis of the philosophy that the United States was built upon, right? Was to not have that inherent trust, and to rebel, or to question, or to do what's best for yourself, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, Canada is one of those countries that's like the most fiat pilled of any developed nation around the world today, just kind of hopelessly, hopelessly believes in the authority of the government, and, kind of turn to it for everything. And, the thing is you're saying about those people, like, who say it's not a big deal, whatever. It's like, yeah, sure. I get it. That's totally your preference. The problem is that in a free society, you're more than able to have that opinion and act accordingly, as am I. In the society that you are now nonchalantly accepting, and even in some cases vocally advocating for, sure, you get to live out what your perspective that you just articulated, but I can't for mine. Right. So in the former, we both get to do what we think is best. In the latter, only you do. Do you not see the danger of that?
Exactly. And, to Albertans' credit, they say, look, none of this would be in place if it wasn't for the fact that our hospitals are being overrun right now. And that's what a lot of the argument is. But then I say, hey, look, you're 20 months into this pandemic, and in a population of 4.3 million people, you have 200 people around, 200, 250 people, whatever the number is, in ICU, and you're maxed out, and you're now having to put restrictions in place because that's all you can handle. And you just go, look, that's a failure of your government. Like,
totally.
If
it's a failure of much. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, if you have that many people and that's all you can handle, and you're this far into the pandemic, like, I don't know. There's really not much more to say on that.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? You're not allowed to say anything more on that. Like, let's be real, right? If in a self-regulating free market system, if demand goes up, that means there's more opportunity, and supply will come up to meet it, right? It's funny how in no point throughout this whole, ordeal, as you say, to use the hospital bed example, it's like, well, if you're saying that there's way more demand, then how come the supply hasn't come online? And the answer is, well, because that's not how governments operate. They operate on spreadsheets and data and slow moving, and the incentives are all fucked up. So, like, if this was a deregulated free market, then that capacity would have come online because there's a benefit to bringing it online. Yeah. But at no point does that even enter the conversation. And I mean, that it's just so dangerous. That's my issue. It's like, I don't give a fuck what anybody does. You do what you think is best, and I'll do what I think is best. And I'm happy to let the chips fall where they may. Yeah. But when we get into a point where the imposition of what people think is best is being, forcefully imposed on people, and in such a short period of time, the history does not, study of history would show that that's probably a very dangerous situation to be in. And that's my concern, is that, like, the kind of the mass hysteria, or the mass narrow-mindedness, or the mass emotional form of decision making rather than rational, is like, well, then all bets are off, right? And anything can really happen. Just whatever narrative takes hold is what plays. And if you don't have those foundational principles, as you said earlier, where the United States was one of the countries that really kind of nailed it on those foundational principles. Other countries have some, but if you just do away with them entirely in favor of an emotional response to a situation, then you're kind of done for. Like, things can go off the rails really fast. And I think, that's what a lot of Bitcoiners are concerned about, and why, talking to someone who's living in Wyoming is probably of interest, because it's like, well, that's a big consideration these days. It's like, where can you go to insulate yourself from the dangers of that sort of decision making dominating most of the world?
Yeah. And like, I don't want to sound like I'm a doomsday prepper or anything either. It's just, but it is at the same time, you want to live in a place where, you're infringed upon the least. And I think that at the end of the day, that's the best that you can really strive for, is to hope for. But yeah, like, I think you hit the nail on the head too when you talk about like the market should dictate it. It's like, look what we're seeing with oil and gas right now. There was a lack of investment in oil and gas. Less wells were being drilled when prices dropped due to the demand being down during COVID. And now everybody's getting hurt on the other end of it, because oil prices are going up, natural gas prices are going up. Oil and gas companies can't drill fast enough right now to meet the demand for people. It's same with, Bitcoin, is that, people are chasing flared gas or stranded gas on Bitcoin mining, or the cheapest sources of energy, because that's where it makes the most sense, right? Like, that's where you should be focusing your attention, because at the end of the day, you need to be profitable and sustainable. And same with what you see, like, let's take Alberta, for example, is that, if hospitalizations are up and you can't handle it, what's the plan in place to fix that, other than just purely locking down? Because, that's just a reaction.
Lock down harder.
Yeah, like this time. At the end of the day, that's just a reaction. You need to have a plan in place that actually mitigates it. And it's like, well, look, how many people were out of work over the last 2 years that were receiving government money to, basically do nothing? Like, is there not like an ability to have put some kind of a government program that's like a 12 or 16 week training program to say, hey, your whole focus in this 12 to 16 weeks is to only treat a COVID patient. And we're going to pay for your schooling to do that. And we're going to get you trained up to work in an ICU, or to, not necessarily, I'm not trying to degrade nurses or doctors or their abilities or anything, but, you can learn a lot in a short amount of time on any subject. And the fact that people were just, basically paid to sit at home, when we could have put programs in place that they could have been adding value to society as well. And so I think that's just the difference in it.
Well, this is where people get to thinking that there's ulterior motivations at play, right? Because it's almost like it's too ignorant, it's too stupid that things have been allowed to happen the way they've happened. Like, and I actually I can see both, and I kind of oscillate back and forth between the two. Like, I fully appreciate how stupid people can be, especially when they're acting en masse, right? And they're not being critical, and their emotions are being taken away through different narratives. Like, people can act really, really stupidly, and that's probably what's going on. But still, it still staggers. It still challenges even that in me when I see, just as you just said, like, there are so many better ways to handle this beyond taking everyone's freedoms away, locking everyone down, and printing a gajillion dollars, right? Like, any sensible person could have come up with a better response, which leads to thinking like, well, are there ulterior motives? We'll probably never know, right? But
and you like to give people credit and say, it's easy to look out from a 30,000 foot view and say you should do something differently, but at the same time, I think just the lack of discussion that happens publicly about what options are available, like, I think, at least from my perspective anyways, is that, my career's been built on risk mitigation in oil and gas operations. All I've done my whole career is try to think of what can go wrong, and then have a solution in place in case that happens. And it's infinite, the number of things that can go wrong when you drill or complete an oil and gas well. It's just, there's so much. And so when you see it seems like that people aren't taking those kind of things into place, and that there's just one answer and that's it, but there's not like a healthy debate or discussion on like all of the potential options. Because as soon as you bring up something that doesn't fit the current way that you're doing it, you're chastised or you're ridiculed, or, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, or, there's just, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like
100%.
there's not a healthy debate on, there should be no topic that's off limits to talk about a better way to do things. And it should be completely public and out there of these things happening.
Yeah.
Because
Isn't it I may be butchering this quote, but I thought it was, and I don't know who it's by, but it like someone defining evil via the deliberate removal of nuance, and so in that way, like imposing a narrow point of view is like almost, kind of part of the definition of evil, right? It's like, you're just saying, no, I'm assuming perfect knowledge and I'm assuming the right to impose that perfect knowledge on everyone, right? Which is completely insane, as you're just saying. I mean, any logical person would agree with what you just said. It's like, look, we live in a dynamic world. Lots of different potential outcomes are possible. What are the probabilities of the different potential outcomes? What are our capabilities? How much should we even be involved in imposing them versus allowing emergent order to occur? And obviously it's not a perfect answer, right? Because when you're dealing with, in particular, engineering related things, like you impose your order on the system, and that's how you get the benefit, right? But so you have to find that balance, and depending on which system you're operating within. But yeah, it's just, we live in a crazy world. We live in a clown world, as the memes so often these days, point to. It's just every day it's like an endless stream. But thank God for Bitcoin. Basically, I'm extremely grateful that Bitcoin is happening, and it's such a lever for change and for transformation on the individual level and for sovereignty on the individual level. And it's imposing a free market effectively on the world. And it's still early days, and it hasn't had a chance to, permeate all different markets of the world yet. But like what it's doing for money, what you guys are doing with energy, I mean, this is the start of it saying, no, if the money is free, then the markets upon which the money is built will also be free. And there's nothing you can do about it. And a lot of people don't like that, because there's a lot of control freaks out there, and there's a lot of egotistical behavior behind that. But I think a lot of people that share an attitude like you and I, where we say, like, do your best, try to seek truth, and allow emergent order to reveal itself as a result of the work that you do and the values that you have and the value you're trying to put out into the world. And so, there's a lot of good stuff happening too amongst the clown world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, Bitcoin, in my opinion, brings, like, ESG is like the, one of the biggest things in all the investment community, no matter what industry you're in, right? Like ESG, the E definitely comes to the forefront of most people's discussions when they talk ESG. And I hope that the environmental side of it doesn't just completely take over. But, a lot of topics and discussions are framed to be, how can you argue this thing? This is good. And so if you question something, you're questioning, you want to do good for the environment, you want to do good for your social communities, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, how can you question that? Because at the end of the day, it's all good things. But
you're a Nazi, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And so in my opinion, though, I don't think that there is a better story for, what brings the most net benefit to society in almost any conversation than Bitcoin. I mean, it can help on so many levels, like where we're not wasting energy. We're taking energy that otherwise would have been wasted. You can build out your grid system to be more reliable when you use baseload to take, or whatever your baseload is, and create excess, you Bitcoin mine off of that. And then you take the S factor, the S factor on the social side of things, and you look what it's doing in El Salvador right now. Like, it's amazing. There's more people in the first month of Bitcoin being recognized as legal tender using a Bitcoin wallet than there are people that have a bank account. Like, that's absolutely amazing. And, the amount of money that people are saving by, with remittance and things like that going to these countries, like, I have a hard time understanding how any politician right now that truly cares about their constituents or their people on any side, left, right, center, whatever, if they understand Bitcoin, how you can actually, like, make a case against it.
Well, you can't.
And
That's the big if,
exactly.
though. It's only ignorance.
Yeah.
So that's
But
the
it's
if.
growing as more and more people are becoming educated. I think that there's a lot of people doing a great job of trying to educate people on the actual utility of Bitcoin, as opposed to just people thinking like, oh, this thing you buy and then it goes up and you make money. Like,
Mhm.
as more and more people educate society as a whole on, how does Bitcoin help the environment, and how does Bitcoin help people, and you start, how does Bitcoin help the monetary, policy, and things like that, is that as more and more people actually become educated on it, like, there's just no way to stop it. It just, you can't.
Mhm. Yeah, but the incumbents will sure try, right? Because it is the death blow to the existing,
Right.
system and how the existing system operates. And anyone who benefits from the current operation, be they in media, government, or wherever, they're the ones that have been, and I presume will continue to be, pumping out these alternative narratives to muddy the water, at least so that
Exactly.
people don't understand fully what Bitcoin is. But again, I mean, what's so beautiful and invokes like spiritual or religious aspect to all this is like, when you have a truth that can't be stopped, I mean, you're going to win.
Yeah.
It's almost inevitable, right? And there's not that many truths that can't be stopped in the world, which again is why, like, the religious stuff gets invoked. And I think that that's a very interesting thing to explore, which I like to explore. But um, yeah, I mean, there's this inevitability about it, and that's a bit dangerous. You want to be careful how much you lean into that, because nothing is truly inevitable. Let's say, right, like an asteroid could wipe out Earth tomorrow, but
Yeah.
as far as things go, it seems highly probable that this is going to continue asserting itself on the world. And so I think, the task of people that believe that it's a force for good is just to lean into it and amplify it as much as possible. Use it as a force for good in your own individual life, right? And use it as a force for good, on the broader world. And
Yeah.
the beautiful thing is that engaging with it for the former objective produces the latter.
Yeah.
And I think that's how things are best organized.
Yeah, I agree. And then, all the positives that it brings, you're starting to just see, more and more institutions or companies realizing it too. And like we said, the oil and gas industry is definitely starting to understand the implications of it. Like, at the end of the day, for anyone in oil and gas to get into Bitcoin, reason for them to do it, or they're not going to do it. But as they're starting to understand, okay, yes, I can make some money off of it, but now also what typically hampers oil and gas companies from doing anything, it's that if it goes against an ESG story that their investors want them to tell, they can't do it. But I think that as the education gets out there, you get more and more of these industries that go, oh, no, we can tell a positive story on why we're using Bitcoin. And I think that's when
Right.
you're really going to start seeing some of this mass adoption.
Totally. And I agree with that wholeheartedly, but also, like, there's no better motive for action than the incentives forcing your hand, right? Like you
Yeah.
you, you can say, like, yeah, sure, our investors don't want us to do X. It's like, all right, well, our competitors 10X the capital on their balance sheet this year. So it's do or die, and those are part of the incentives of Bitcoin, which is what makes it so ultimately you can't ignore it, right? And which gives it that sense of inevitability.
Yeah.
Do you get the sense that things are like, is there a tipping point happening in oil and gas yet, or is it still too early to say that that's how people are looking at it?
I think so. You've got a lot of companies right now that are using, you know, smaller Bitcoin mining systems on wells that are truly stranded or flared. Um, I think I brought up some points as to how the scalability of that can be very challenging. Scalability, or just staying online 100% of the time, or even 90% of the time, or operational logistical challenges of having to move to the next place and the next place. And that's why having them containerized and having the ability to move things is great. But at the same time, that also still cuts into your operating expenses. But I think that there's a lot of companies that do realize that, hey, if we have some stranded assets, or some wells that we can't get to the market, this is a solution. I think almost all of them recognize that now. But like I said, those wells are getting harder to come by, or those applications are getting harder to come by, as today's ESG environment and lack of investment into the space makes those opportunities harder to come by, because the majority of wells that are being drilled are going to get put to sales already. What I think you are starting to realize is that companies are looking at this as going, some of the biggest companies in Bitcoin mining companies in the world have 30, 50, 100, 200 megawatts in operation, which is, massive scale Bitcoin mine. But you look at the power that's being utilized, and the oil and gas industry deals with this type of volume of potential power all day long, and is actually quite insignificant to their overall production. And so I think, and then you see what the balance sheet is of some of these public mining companies, and what their market cap is, and what the, value of these Bitcoin mines are. And you start having companies going, well, we don't need to build something anywhere close to being that big, but if we can dedicate some fraction of a percent of our gas stream and build something 10% of the size of that, or 5% of the size of that, and we can add that kind of value to our organization, why would we not be doing that? And so I think you are starting to have some companies come to those realizations. We're working with a few right now that, we can't mention who they are, but they're big names. And when some of these companies pull the trigger on some of these projects, or start to announce what they're doing, they have the ability to be competitive with, almost any Bitcoin mining company out there, based on the resources and the assets that they sit on. It doesn't have to be stranded or flared only. It can be a combination of everything. And so I think that that's the part that most companies haven't come to the realization of, is like, what is like the massive value potential of what they're sitting on. But that's definitely rounding the corner, in my opinion.
Yeah. Last one for you, man. Where do you see this going in the next 5 to 10? Like Bitcoin mining and the oil and gas industry specifically. I mean, you kind of just touched on it there, but where do you see this playing out, or how do you see this playing out?
So I want to clarify what I've talked about, logistical potential or issues on flare gas Bitcoin mining, is that's not me saying that it's not possible. I think I've also spoken to how it greatly helped our company, in keeping our oil production online. And so there's an absolute immense application for that. It's just going to take the people that are really good at doing it and understanding the operational issues or logistical issues that come with it, to make sure that they have their business model correct to take advantage of it. There's a lot of shut-in, idled, orphaned wells out there as well, that are both an environmental and a capital liability to a lot of these states. I think that there's some potential for that. It's going to be a small percentage, but there is some potential for that. I really do think the biggest thing that you're going to see is that there's a lot of oil companies that are large landowners. They own mineral interests in the well, royalties. They have substations, big power grids already built within their positions to handle some of the power intensive projects on the oil and gas side that we already have. And they're going to start recognizing that like a very small portion of our total production can actually turn out to be a very large Bitcoin mine and be competitive globally on the actual market. Like we can compete against some of the biggest guys out there if we develop some of this. But I mean, obviously it's very capital intensive, but the energy does sit there. And if you own that whole supply chain and you're cutting out the middleman, and it's, we own the minerals, we own the wells, we own the land, we own all of that. And the overwhelming majority of our product gets sold traditionally in the market, that our operating expenses that we have on the Bitcoin mine can be paid for, and we can hold Bitcoin, and you build it with that kind of a purpose in mind, that your business, you look at it like from an asymmetrical risk standpoint. If your business can be self-sustaining without Bitcoin, but then you add Bitcoin mining to it, it's, you can almost become unstoppable in that mindset. Yeah. And so I think that that's going to be the next step in the next 5 years. You're going to see some very large oil companies, midstream groups that recognize that, like, Bitcoin shouldn't be our business model. It shouldn't be what we rely on. but it can be in an addition to what we already do, which is profitable and needed in society. I think that you're going to see these guys absolutely blowing up and becoming extremely competitive in the Bitcoin mining space.
That's so
And
interesting.
so
And
J
you
Energy,
know,
you know, that's what we're trying to do and facilitate is
yeah,
on that kind of a scale.
it just occurs to me when you were saying that, I mentioned earlier that Bitcoin will bring free markets to money, and as a result of that, to all industries ultimately. But it's interesting to kind of note that, like, okay, well, Bitcoin incentivizes finding like the cheapest energy, or incentivizes, energy production to go into it. And you have to, because it's such a competitive market, you have to be very discerning. So basically the market, Bitcoin competes on a free market for energy, maybe more so than anything else for a variety of reasons. And the result of that will be those companies and those producers, as you said, holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? They're able to not forced into selling their Bitcoin. And what that ultimately does is 5-10 years down the road, that's going to mean that they are way, again, my assumption is that Bitcoin continues to do what it's going to do, and ultimately becomes, global based money. They're going to be in such a stronger position than all of their competitors who did not do that. And it's kind of like revenge of the energy free markets, right? It's like that. Not only will Bitcoin change the dynamics of the market itself, but the incredible boon to the people that first approached it in that way and first availed of that and first engaged in that free market will be orders of magnitude, higher benefit than those that didn't. And as a result of that, they'll be able to ostensibly, preserve the free market in the industry that they're in.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, as difficulty increases and margins get smaller, if when that comes, it's going to be, obviously, the cheapest cost producers, when I'm talking, mining Bitcoin, are going to be the winners. And that's how the oil and gas space works too. When times get tough in the oil and gas environment, it's the cheapest cost producers, the ones that spend the less dollar per barrel that survive and stay online. And so, yeah, I wholeheartedly believe that the oil and gas industry will start looking at this as like, we can substitute, some portion of our revenue stream for Bitcoin mining. And if Bitcoin mining works or doesn't work, hopefully we can reach a payout on our investment first before that happens. But all of our operating expenses and everything, our business model works whether or not Bitcoin mining works. And so you only have upside value on Bitcoin mining if you add it into your portfolio, and you don't make it an overwhelming portion of your portfolio. You've got gas production, you've got oil production, you just utilize a small percentage of that. And like I said, the power that can be generated off of a unit volume of gas is significant. And that in these full field gathering systems and in these gas plants and midstream lines, there's so much natural gas being moved that such a small percentage of that gas devoted to Bitcoin mining makes you a major player.
Right.
If, so it's just, I look at that as just have an asymmetrical risk portfolio where you basically have eliminated all downside to Bitcoin mining, because you have a business model that will work. And if your Bitcoin mine doesn't work, you will still eventually make your returns on that, and it won't sink your company. And you still make oil production, you still have gas going down the line, but now you've just substituted Bitcoin to act as like a natural hedge against your other production, or like to potential to capture an arbitrage value. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's what you're going to see, is that you're going to see some massive oil and gas companies and midstream groups that become major players in the space, and they have almost no downside risk.
Man, that's exciting. I can't wait to see how this stuff plays out. And I'm sure, you feel the same way, given that you're so involved in the industry. Dude, I really appreciate the time. Was there anything else, you want to cover, or anything related to Jay, or if, people wanting to learn more that you want to share?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I appreciate you having us on here. We like to be able to tell our story, and the big thing for us is just kind of talk about how we're, we got a little bit different mindset or mentality, or, a little bit different business model than most people out there. And it's not that one business model is right or wrong at all. It's just that, we chose to go a different path on this. And, that's really all we're trying to do. Is we're on a mission to, one, build our own mining site. We're one of the largest Bitcoin mining companies in Wyoming right now. We're continuously putting, more containers that we're building out on our site. We've got 2 more to fire up this week. But really, we're just on a mission to educate and advocate for Bitcoin mining within the oil and gas space, within our own connections, and trying to make people aware of what the plentiful resource that they sit on, and how little of a risk Bitcoin mining can actually be within their own portfolio, but how much potential upside it has. And so that's really the mission that we're on.
Well, man, I love it. And we'll have to get together in another 6 to 12 to talk about, everything that's happened in the interim, because I'm sure it's going to be a very, if things progress the way many of us think they're going to over the next 12 to 18 months, I'm sure it's not going to be boring. So we'll probably
absolutely
have lots of more stories to tell in that period of time.
Yeah, let's stay in touch for sure. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Take care, brother.